everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the letter of comics like Batman, X-Men, Batman One Bad Day, Catwoman, Daredevil, Human Target, Sins of Sinister, Love Everlasting, Immortal X-Men, Wonder Woman Historia, Venom, Danger Street, Old Dog, Riddler Year One, and many more. It's Clayton Cowles. Thanks for coming on, Clayton.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I just wanted to say off the top that congrats, that is the most comics I've ever had in an intro. And I know for a fact I'm missing several books based off your Instagram. You're working on a lot of stuff?
Yes, I am. It's a lot.
What is your comp situation?
My comp situation?
Yeah.
I get one copy of each issue and trade that I do for Marvel, and I get 5 copies of just trades for DC. And for others, the mileage varies. IDW sends me 2 of everything, including variants, and that's pretty sweet. And with Image, I can request however many I want. Usually I stick to 10. So there's enough for the rest of the team. And so my basement doesn't get flooded with comics. So yeah, my basement is really full.
I imagine I've worked on one comic ever and I got 50 or something like that, 30 or 50 years. Yeah, I mean, it's I don't even know what to do with these. I thought about giving them out to kids on Halloween, but I think that would have been inappropriate based off of the age. But if you had gotten, 5 of each book, I'm pretty sure you would have several closets full.
Yeah, it would be completely untenable. Yeah, I was getting 25 of one book for a while.
Wow.
Actually, 2 books. I got 25 each of Cowboy Ninja Viking and 25 each of Reaver, including trades. So they take up a lot of space for sure.
25 trades?
Yeah, 25 trades straight up.
Wow.
I might have been doing that for Wictiv too. We went wild on Wictiv.
I'm always interested in what people do with their comps because I imagine, I don't know, if you're a very prolific writer or something like that and they want to make sure that you're blessed with many copies, it's I guess maybe you can take them to conventions with you or something like that.
Yeah, I have no idea what Tom King does. You should ask him. He is so incredibly prolific. And I'm and yeah, when I go through the comps sometimes, I'm how does he manage all of this? Much less, how does he manage writing so many books at once? That guy is a wizard.
He really is. But I was curious, how do you, I don't even know how many comics I listed there. It had to have been close to 20. And I know that's not it. How do you manage all of that? Is it just about scheduling and being smart with your time and just, managing deadlines? Or is it... I don't even know what it takes.
Well, not having much of a life helps. The pandemic went pretty well for me. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
For the most part. A lot of it is just, it's trying to be smart with your time and also how you make the books. I'm sure other letters have talked about this on the podcast, but action keys in Adobe applications are really important because you can use them to turn 10 procedures into a single keystroke. So finding different ways to take as much of the technical out of the process, so it's just purely creative as possible, is a big part of it. I just learned this last year, but Adobe Illustrator has something called character styles where you can set up a hotkey to match with not just a font, but a style. So you can set up a hotkey. So when you press it, it will change a block of text from whatever to, say, the main dialogue font of that book. And then you can also do that with the italic setting of that book and the bold italic setting of that book. And up until last year, I was doing all of that manually, manually selecting bold italic from the font menu and stuff after selecting the individual words. And now I can just press a key and my productivity went up 30% or something. And yeah, just looking for little ways to do that. So your clients aren't waiting as long, and B, you just have more time for yourself. That's a big part of it, and more time to take on more jobs if that's your goal.
Yeah, that is crazy. So you could basically, let's say you had a block of text in a bubble or something, or in a balloon or something, and you could just highlight it and then push one of those action keys or hotkeys, and all of a sudden it's Danger Street font in the right layout. Is that the case? Essentially,
I convert the text before I put it into the balloon. And then shape the balloon around that. But if say I had a block of text and I needed to bold something, I could just select the word and hit the key instead of selecting the word, going down the drop menu, selecting bold italic or whatever.
I'm just trying to think of the multipliers because it's the efficiencies that adds to it, where it's across projects, across words, across issues. It doesn't seem like a big deal individually, but I imagine that adds to hours and hours and hours and hours saved for you every year.
Absolutely. And like lettering is so much of just doing that. It's like a bunch of micro actions that like small things add up to a big thing. And the more of those small things you can take out of it, the faster you can get the book done, and you're not losing anything creative as a part of it.
This is something I was going to go over a little bit later, but as you started lettering full time in 2009, is a lot of what you've learned since you started, I'm sure a lot of it is about the artistry of it too. But is a decent part of it just figuring out efficiencies and how you can do this in a quicker and less painful sort of way?
Oh, for sure. Like that was baked into me early on. When I first joined VC, they actually sent me like a batch of pre-made actions and said, okay, learn how to use all these, learn the keystrokes that match up to them. So like you aren't taking forever to letter a book, And then as time went on, I started analyzing my own workflow more and started looking for other things that I could turn into like a single keystroke action. Like I have one set up where I can roughen balloons, like turn a regular looking balloon into a wavy or a crackly looking one. I can just select it, hit the key, and boom, it's done. And yeah, when I first started out, I was just doing that manually, selecting the balloon, going to effects, view, distort. I forget the rest of them because I haven't used them in so long, but yeah, it turned 4 keystrokes into one. And if you do that with like 10 different actions that you're already doing on the page anyway, it saves you an incredible amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. And your clients love you for it.
I read in another interview that you once had to do a rush job in 2 hours. And I don't imagine that if you had to go through all those menus and everything like that you'd be able to do any sort of book in 2 hours. I mean, it's probably still not recommended to do any comic in 2 hours as a letterer, but at the same time, like it's possible because you have all these efficiencies sorted out.
Yeah. And I got really lucky with that one, if that's the book I'm thinking of, because I think it was an issue of Batman. And lucky for me, it was all captions. So like I'm not shaping word balloons around a body of text. I'm not like pointing tails in the right direction or anything. And I actually have an action set up that just like creates, that'll create a perfectly shaped caption box around a block of text. So I don't have to adjust it or anything. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's how I was able to do that.
One more question before we kind of get into your past a little bit. I am interested in, because of those efficiencies and because once you start kind of understanding a project a bit, do you find that the further you get into a run, the easier a project is because you've kind of figured out all those nitty gritty kind of details? Like when you're in, I mean, WicDiv might be a bad example because Wick and Divine was always doing new things and trying new things and probably pushing you at the same time. But like when you're on issue like 30 or something like that, are you pretty set in terms of knowing the right way to approach things so it's a little easier for you than it was like, say, issue number 1?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just like me who's adapting, it's the entire creative team. Because like the longer you work on one book, the more everyone has their rhythm. They know what to do. I'm working on Captain Marvel today. Captain Marvel number 47. I've been on since issue 1. Of this run, not the entire book as a whole, the Kelly Thompson run. Mm-hmm. And it's very much that where both like I know what to do because like I know how Kelly writes. I know her isms, and I also know like what typos she's going to have. Like no shade to Kelly. Kelly is an awesome writer, but like every single writer has like their little quirks that proofreading is going to flag. It's nothing to do with them. And so just figuring all of that out and just getting to know I guess it's slightly less easier to adapt to the artist because they're always rotating.
Yeah.
The person who's drawing Captain Marvel now, I don't think was even working for Marvel when we started. We started with Carmen Canero and Lee Garbett, and now it's Sergio Davila and Javier Pina. Yeah, like the more time you spend on a book, you just know what to look out for. So not only are you just doing damage control, you're just having an easier time doing it because you've already done it a million times, like with anything.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get further into the process, because I have like a million questions I want to ask about that, but I want to go back to the beginning for you. When did you first get into comics as a reader, and like what were your early favorites? Like what drew you to the medium?
I think my comics journey began with the Batman and X-Men cartoons in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
And like I definitely wouldn't be here in this house that lettering bought if I hadn't watched that damn X-Men cartoon and hadn't given me the bug. I wouldn't like actually read X-Men comics until maybe 10 years later, but I read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes, The Adventures of Tintin, The Far Side, and just browsing the newspaper funnies. I read a ton of those. Like I wouldn't say I was a fan of most of them, but they were there and I read them because I guess I just like comics and didn't know it yet. Then at around 13 or 14, I was just browsing Marvel.com and they had just announced the Exiles comic. And because of the cartoon and like trading cards and action figures and stuff, I had a good enough knowledge of X-Men continuity to be able to appreciate it. So I picked that up. I picked up a couple of back issues of X-Men at a comic store because I just happened to be there one day, and I started reading Ultimate Spider-Man. And yeah, that's it. From that point on, I was a goner.
Yeah. X-Men the animated series and Batman the animated series, I think, created like basically a generation of comic fans for sure, but also I think comic creators. Like it's a very common origin story. Everyone watched that back then, and it was like
seriously,
it was like the perfect gateway to getting into comics. I mean, in concert with the comic strips and everything like that. I mean, that's a big part of mine too. I started reading comics when I was reading the Transformers series in the 80s because I would basically like I would read or watch or just like reside in whatever Transformers stories I could get my hands on. And so that was kind of my gateway. And then I started reading or watching X-Men the animated series. And I was like, I got to know more about these guys. And I started buying the comics and yada, yada, yada. But I read in an interview that you said that you decided you wanted to make comics for a living when you were 14, which is when you first started picking up those books like Exiles and everything like that. Why 14? Was there something specific that happened beyond just picking up those books? Or is it just getting those books that helped you realize you're just like, this is what I want? Like, this is just the coolest.
I was very artistic as a child and spent a lot of time drawing whenever I liked. And a lot of that was X-Men and Marvel and Batman characters. And in one of the back issues I picked up, I saw an ad for the Joe Kubert School and thought, oh, here's a way that I could actually do this for a living. Before that, I was going to be a psychiatrist. Bit of a leap.
I was going to be a marine biologist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Didn't go very far in that direction.
Yeah, me neither. What turned you on to that? Was it that Seinfeld episode?
No, I just really liked anything in the sea, which is funny because I'm also very afraid of like the open water. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and I spend a lot of time on boats going deep into like the open sea.
That makes so much sense.
It's freaky. Anything could be underneath you. I had this recurring nightmare when I was a kid of a blue whale surfacing under a boat that I'm fishing on. And blue whales are gigantic, and it seemed like it would be a really bad thing. There's probably worse things that could happen. Blue whales are at least like verging on, I don't want to say benevolent, but not like trying to kill you.
Yeah, they're not going to eat you.
No.
Not on purpose anyway.
Anyways, well, back to the making a career of it. Amongst those X-Men comics, one of the things that I saw in that interview is that you said in an interview that Joe Madureira and Jim Lee were your favorite artists at the time, and it's because of them that you letter comic books. Why is it because of them? Was it just because like that was really like a push in the illustration direction, wanting to go to the Kubert School because you're like, I want to be like these guys?
Essentially, I didn't draw like them at all, which was funny.
Right.
Whenever anyone looked at my art at the time, they would say stuff like, oh, you must really like Mike Allred. And I'd say, no. I mean, I do like him, but not like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did set me on the path to wanting to be a penciler because their work just looked awesome. And there was definitely some nostalgia baked in because I remembered seeing their work as a child because Jim Lee's art was on everything in the early 90s. He was inescapable.
Pizza boxes.
Hell yeah. And like I even had some like Pizza Hut cups, and I think Joe Madureira drew one of them.
I found what was it? I think it was a Pizza Hut ad recently. And I always thought it was drawn by Joe Mad, but I got a DM. I think it was Scott Koblish who actually did it, and he did it for like Marvel products, which are like Marvel, what is it called? Special projects.
Oh, cool.
And it's funny. Like I think there's this like massive backstory behind all the Pizza Hut stuff that would be a really interesting article or podcast to do someday. Apparently, I'm just deciding to give myself work in this, but
well, count me in. I can't wait to read it. I should mail him that cup, ask him to sign it.
You should bring it to a convention you happen to be at with Joe Mad, and you can get him to sign it.
So yeah, those two accidentally turned me into a letterer. Like, go figure.
So you went to the Kubert School to become an artist.
Right.
What was that experience like, and how did it help guide you to becoming a letterer?
It was a lot. I'll say for the most part, it was very positive. It's very intense, and they tell you that right off the bat that it's designed to be a comic book boot camp where they're going to make you draw as much as possible and draw as many things as possible. You're going to learn anatomy and storytelling and composition and whatever else they can throw at you. And they're also going to teach you, like, whether it's on purpose or not, like how to have good taste in comics, you know? I remember Bernie Wrightson being really hammered in during that first year. Like, he might as well have been God. And I, of course, had never heard of Bernie Wrightson before. I knew Jim Lee, Joe Mad, Alan Davis, and whoever was drawing Ultimate Spider-Man that month, which would have been Mark Bagley, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It was very much a boys' club, for better and for worse. It was the first place where I really felt like I was among my own people, with all that entails. So, and I made some great friends there, a lot of them who I still talk to this day. But like, we worked crazy hours. We were all drawing at least 10 hours a day. We were not partying because there was no time to party. And it had a super high dropout rate. I think we started with 42 kids and ended with 19 graduating. And I say kids for lack of a better word. Some of those guys were already in their 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really wonder what it's like now. But yeah, I worked a ton, and it was a great way to meet 3 guys with the last name Kubert. That was pretty exciting. I knew who they were.
Yeah. I mean, as an X-Men person, I have to imagine you were very familiar with them. I do have to ask, you went at the same time as my pal Tad Galusha. Did he ever try to wrestle you?
No, I was way too skinny back then. I think he thought he would have broken me.
That's good.
Yeah, we were pretty tight though.
Tad's a good guy.
I love that man.
He does try to wrestle people a lot, or at least he used to. I don't think he's technically allowed to right now because I think it's bad for his body because we're getting older, Clayton, and it's ill-advised to just.
I hear that, man. I've thrown out my back like 3 times, and I'm only 35.
Is that lettering related, or is that just life related?
Both. It's both from being at the desk way too long and then doing stuff that I shouldn't, like doing like 30 deadlifts at the gym after being at the desk for 8 hours. I don't recommend it.
No.
Yeah, that'll mess you up when you're 29.
I do have to say, though, good for you for like exercising, because I think that, I don't know, God, I mean, we mentioned Helioscope before we started recording, but Helioscope Studios, and it's like Steve Lieber is like the one who's always reminding people to like sit up straight. There's always like little physical things that I think would, I mean, obviously every person should exercise and every person should sit up straight and be good to their body and stuff like that. But I think it's extra important for when you have to sit at a desk for a long time, because it's very strenuous on your body.
Yeah, definitely. Even Joe Kubert was telling us to exercise, like setting up like even just a 30-minute, some kind of an exercise routine, do that daily. Like that was, to him, that was just as important as like knowing how a bicep curls.
My wife is an architect, and she had to go through what they call studio, which is like basically, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but basically it's when you're going through college to get your degree and you have to go through these like really long, strenuous hours to like do your projects and everything like that. And basically it seems like it involves a lot of all-nighters and a lot of spending time with people who are doing similar things, which sounds very much like the Kubert School. Sometimes I wonder if when you're going through programs like that, like what you were going through, part of the reason why they do it so intensely is just to basically help people understand what it takes in terms of hours and what it takes in terms of like sometimes you got a deadline and you got a crunch like that. Maybe that's just trying to prepare people to understand what it might take from a time standpoint. Like, do you feel like that's the case?
Oh, what they were very open about that. Yeah, they said straight up, if you're going to do this job, this is what it's going to take.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, by like putting us in red alert mode all the time, like that was the idea. So you're always prepared for the worst.
Did you take a lettering course when you were there?
I did. Lettering was mandatory for everyone in first year. Everyone takes a lettering class. They hadn't really added digital lettering to the curriculum yet, so we were doing it all by hand.
Oh, wow.
And I did really well in that class. I got A's. It just made sense to me. And I took to digital lettering pretty quickly when we did a quick unit of that in second year in layout and design class. Yeah, as graduation was approaching, I thought, I have a real knack for this thing that no one else seems to really do or even care about. Maybe this would be a good way to break into the industry. And then I could become an artist when I feel I'm competent enough. That was definitely my mindset at the time. But then once I started lettering professionally, I just had a lot of fun doing it and developed like an even stronger knack for it. Also realized that I have no patience drawing stories for other people. Like the best I can do, like I think over the last 5 years, I've drawn exactly 2 pages of comics for 2 different people. And I think that was all I would have been able to stand. Mm-hmm. And even those were a pretty tall climb. And one of those was for Kieran Gillen, one of my favorite writers. And I'm like, I can't even stand drawing something for him. Like, what's wrong with me? I'll stick to lettering. I'll draw my own stuff one day.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just got to draw your own original graphic novel as your magnum opus someday.
That's the plan.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is starting 2023 with a bang. In January, there'll be new campaigns launched each week from some incredible creators. Spearheaded by Paul Allore's Pink Midnight presents The Butterfly House, there are also campaigns by Craig Rasmussen, plus Waco Comics' Jeff Messer, Cam Kirkow, Doug Wood, and more. All these creators greatly appreciate your support over at zoop.gg. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the checkout is easy and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop are the comic book crowdfunding specialists and are currently open for submissions. Check out some case studies on their blog at blog.zoop.gg and email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start the campaign. And now, back to the show. You know, I did read that, I mean, like I said earlier, you've been lettering full-time since 2009, and your first Marvel lettering job was Punisher Annual #1 from the 2009 series.
Oh, really?
According to Marvel.com.
I mean, I believe it. Is that a Rick Remender book?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, honestly, There's been so many Punishers over the years. I think that was the Frankencastle series. I mean, it wasn't probably Frankencastle at the time, but I have to ask, like, I mean, it sounds like you don't even necessarily remember it. I imagine, like, to some degree, when you've done so many projects, like, there's probably ones that stand out as, like, really bright lights, but some of it is just, like, it's just, like, you get lost in the sea of them.
Yep. I mean, I was just talking about this 2 weeks ago, and now I feel like a dunce. But I thought my first, like, full Marvel lettering credit was a fill-in issue of Fantastic Four, written by Hickman.
It's possible.
That Punisher one sounds incredible. I think I saw the cover for that not too long ago after Jason Pearson passed away. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that cover looks so familiar. Did I letter that book? I don't remember.
Oh my God. Yeah, I imagine that type of thing happens sometimes. I have to admit, I'm no better at it. One time I was going to do a podcast with your frequent collaborator, Jamie McKelvey at Emerald City Comic Con.
Hey.
I was preparing for a podcast, or I was preparing for it. And so I was going back through some interviews with Jamie to kind of like see what he likes to talk about, see what he doesn't like to talk about. And then I get across this one interview and I'm like, man, this is really, like, this person is asking all the same questions I would ask. And then I look at this, at the top, it says, by David Harper. And I'm like, oh, that happens.
Yeah, I believe it.
Okay, so last thing before we get into some process, you mentioned VC earlier. That's Virtual Calligraphy, Chris Eliopoulos' lettering studio. For listeners, that's why it would on occasion say VC's Clayton Cowles in the credits. How did that happen, and how did being part of VC open doors for you as a letterer?
I got involved with VC by a pure stroke of luck. I told one of my teachers at Kubert School, the awesome Gabe Bridwell, he loves me talking about him. I told him that I was thinking about getting into lettering, and he started connecting me with people who needed letterers, and one of them just happened to be Chris. Marvel told him to bring on 2 more people. So he had just met Gabe a couple of weeks ago at a convention, and he contacted Gabe and said, hey, do you know any students who would be interested in an internship? And Gabe connected the dots. I was put in touch with Joe Caramagna, who I'd be interning for. Went out to meet him the following weekend, hit it off, interned for him for a couple of weeks. And he said, yeah, this guy, we should start paying this guy. He's good. And I've been with VC ever since, all the way since winter 2009.
One thing I thought was interesting, I was reading through, you did a Reddit AMA and you were talking, or I forgot what it was, but somebody brought up VC and you said, or somehow it came up and you said that for your Marvel work, you do it for VC, but for like independent stuff, you don't do it for VC. Is VC strictly Marvel?
Pretty much. We used to do more work for other companies just on the side. Mm-hmm. There's one publisher whose name escapes me that I did a VC book for them, but they were mostly doing stuff written by Hollywood screenwriters who wanted their pitches to be turned into movies.
Oh, yeah.
But I did like one post-apocalyptic graphic novel for them, and we were doing the Miller World books for a while. Not anymore, to my knowledge. Yeah, VC basically, as far as I believe, was made to do Marvel stuff. And if someone happened to contact Chris, he would like get one of us to pitch it because Chris hates saying no to people. And we've basically operated as Marvel's in-house lettering service, I think, since like 2003.
Yeah.
Way before I joined the company. And I do all the other books for DC, IDW, Image, etc., just on my own. That's just me. I'm buying my own fonts. Chris isn't managing me, and I'm fighting my own battles like a big boy.
It's always interesting seeing like the varying studios for, like, for example, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think Lee Luffridge had a studio for coloring.
Yeah.
And then like, I think Matt Wilson came up there and like.
Yeah. Starts with a Z, I think.
I don't remember, but I remember a lot of like top colorists like kind of came through there. And like, you look at the lineup who's worked for VC and it's just like all the best letterers, or a lot of the best letterers.
Yeah. Russ Wooten.
Yeah, Russ Wooten. Yeah, it's really interesting to see that. And it seems like, you know, if you're kind of starting off, getting in with one of those studios is a really good way to A, get work, and B, like kind of get your feet wet and really understand the industry before kind of striking out on your own. Yeah.
Well, I think Russ and I are fairly unique in that regard. I don't think the other guys have, I shouldn't say guys, Ariana Marr is now also part of the team. The other VCers have much of an interest in expanding beyond VC because like I think they're just happy there. Like, yeah, some of them do side books. I think Ariana and Travis both do. But yeah, I in my case, I just got a few offers that I just couldn't say no to. And I've been doing both things ever since. Whether Chris is happy with that or not is I'm not willing to ask him.
It does not seem like it's affected your productivity, so you got that going for you. But let's get into the process stuff. I want to start with the basics. When you're first getting into a new project, what's your approach? Like, do you have a typical process for sort of breaking down what you want to do and how you want to do it? Or does that vary wildly based off of projects?
I start with basically the same approach, unless the creators on the team are people who I'm already familiar with. I'll start by reading the book and looking at all the artwork and trying to determine what would be the best lettering style for this book, whether it's balloon shapes, balloon strokes, fonts, colors, tails, etc. And then I'll like take a sample page, find whichever page in the book that I have art for. Sometimes I don't have all the art yet. I'll find whichever page of art has like the most varied script that covers most of the bases. If a page has both a locator caption and word balloons, and also like third person narration captions or required custom voices, I'll just take out that page, go through my font arsenal, pick out like 10 different fonts, narrow it down to 4 to 6 of them, and then see how all of those look against the page. Mm-hmm. Like I'll letter a sample page for myself, see how everything looks. And usually I'll cut 2 more fonts after that because they just don't look as good against the art in my head as they do in execution. So I'm doing all that and trying to, this is going to suck because I know I'm totally biting what Hassan said on your podcast, but I try to match the art like with the style of the font and the stroke of the balloon. And basically, like he said, I'm trying to match the line. Mm-hmm. What is the most common texture of the line? Is it smooth? Is it gritty? Is it somewhere in between? Is it thick? Is it wispy? Like, what are the most common types of lines that the artist is using on this page? And I'll take that into account, try to consider the atmosphere of the book. Is this a horror title? Is it sci-fi? Is it a thriller? Is it a romance comic? I don't get to do that too much, but I do now. Thank you very much, Tom King. I'm finally letting a romance book. And and dig deep, put a lot of intuition to work, and whip together 4 to 5 samples, send them to the creative team and see what they think. And most of the time they'll just pick a sample page and say, we like this style, go with this. But once in a very great while, they'll come to me with like another font and say, hey, try this one. Kelly Sudaconic did that with Pretty Deadly. She found a font that she liked better, asked me to use that. And I said, okay. And then she turned out to be absolutely right. So I've never doubted her since. Kelly has a really great eye for design. And I think Kyle Higgins did too. I think there was one particular font he wanted me to use on Ordinary Gods, and I think he uses the same font in all of the Massive Verse books. Not that I've looked, but I think that's the case. I think he just wants everything looking one way, which is fine. He's got a brand. That's cool. And so after that's done, then I just get to work lettering the book and iron out whatever kinks that style may have accidentally given me. Like, oh, this text, usually it's the text is too big or too small, and I'll have to like knock it down half a point size or knock it up half a point size to make it read better. And pretty much after that first issue, it's set in stone, and I carry on from there.
Mm-hmm. I do think the line part is interesting because that's one of the tricky things. I once did an interview. I've referenced this before, and I'm sure I referenced it in the interview with Haas. But I did an interview with Phonographics before Phonographics was Phonographics. He was literally just going by Stephen Finch at the point, and he said that like,
when was that? The year 2000?
I think it was 2009, maybe like 2010 or something like that. It was a while ago.
Wow.
It was for a Zuda book. Do you remember Zuda?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was for a Zuda thing.
Zuda was talked about a lot at Kubert School. All the teachers were saying, this is going to be the next big thing. Like, try to put together a Zuda book.
I like Zuda.
C'est la vie.
Yeah, I thought Zuda was cool. It went away in a very sad way, in my opinion. But either way, I talked to Steven for that, or Phonographics for that, and he said something along the lines of like, his goal, it's not his goal, but basically it's like the letterer's goal to be unnoticed in some ways. And I think that if somebody who read that like didn't think about what he meant, they could like take that into like, oh, you don't want to have artistry to it or something like that. But I think he really just meant that you want to be a part of the reading experience. You don't want to like be showy or something and distract from it. And I think that's where the line thing comes in, right? Is where you want to complement everything in a way that makes sense for the book and complements the other visual elements. Is that the case?
Absolutely. Enhance, don't distract. I was just talking about this with some other people, but they also talked to Haas, and and according to them, he goes by the same philosophy. And I'm looking at his work and going, wow, your work is so dynamic. I would not have guessed he would have thought that way, but it still works. He's still a fantastic letterer, and he's still doing the thing. It all fits in, but I'm looking at it and looking at all the tricks that he uses and go, wow, I would never have thought to do that there in this way, which is also good. I'm glad that like there's that like enhance, don't distract is, yeah, like you said, becoming a recipe for blandness, which is something that I worry that I do too much, where I worry that I'm being too conservative with my approach because I'm so worried about being distracting that I don't go for it. And I don't think Haas has that problem. And that way, like, cool, I'm glad there's a variety of lettering voices who are available now. I don't think that was the case when I was starting out. I think it was all pretty homogenous back then.
I do think it's interesting, though, because it makes sense that you two would kind of have slightly different approaches, because you come from a very conventional background. Like, you come from the Kubert School, and then you come from a studio. And Haas, I mean, I don't know entirely what Haas, like his path to becoming a letterer, but it seems like most of it was like self-taught and kind of like not whim-based, but like, you know, he's figuring out the right answers for himself while kind of studying what other people have done and everything like that. And so...
Yeah, and he's talking to Aditya, who seems to have like similar philosophies to him.
Right. And so...
And vice versa.
Them having a little bit more of bucking convention, having like a little bit more like taking some big swings and stuff like that while still kind of fitting into it. It's interesting. But, related to that, lettering is a crucial part of the comic experience because it very much defines our read in a real way. But it is also an art form, one in which I imagine to some degree you want to bring your own style to the project in the same way that both of your peers do. How much do those two sides like come into conflict? Do you ever find yourself wanting to go for big swings because it feels like the right answer, but you also know it isn't necessarily right for the project, so they're kind of in conflict? Is that a thing that happens ever?
Sometimes. This might be part of the problem that I was alluding to earlier, but I try to take my ego out of it as much as possible when I'm designing a book, because like in my mind, I'm there, like I'm purely there for them. This isn't about me. If I'm being told how to do my job by somebody, then I have a very big ego about what I do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like design and artistry, I'm not consciously trying to put myself into it. I'm just trying to do the job. do what I think they want me to do, and so on. And like if they have like a request for a style of any kind, I'm happy to try to execute it. Sometimes it's just untenable, but yeah, I don't really see myself as like the front man of the band or anything, or like I think like Nick Mason of Pink Floyd would be an apt comparison. He's the drummer for Pink Floyd. He's obviously good, but like nobody's really there to see him. Like he's good at his job. It wouldn't be Pink Floyd without him. But you know, he's just off there in the back keeping time while David Gilmour and Roger Waters do their crazy shit. Like that's kind of how I see myself too.
Makes sense to me.
I should have said Ringo. Like
No, I like yours.
I love Ringo.
But the Beatles don't go wild out. I mean, like, yeah, obviously like John and Paul like did their own thing, but at the same time, I think like if you're gonna go for like wild out artistry, Pink Floyd works, but
yeah, also I don't sing. I guess that's important.
That is true. That is true. Okay, going back to specific approaches, how different are your approaches to like different projects? For example, this week I bought 4 comics. I think 3 of which were lettered by you. Sins of Sinister, Human Target, and One Bad Day, Catwoman. Batman, One Bad Day, Catwoman. They were all released this week. Actually, I don't even remember what the 4th one was, but it might have been you too. What dictates your approach per project for like those 3? Do you have, you might not even remember because you might have wrapped those a while ago, but like, did you go into each of those knowing each of them needed what, like dramatically different things, or do they kind of have the same approach to, I mean, just because they're all like big 2 projects?
Right. Like same dance, different tune.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Sins of Sinister didn't really require much innovation because we use the same style there that we use in pretty much all of the X-Men comics. That's what we have to do now, except for like minor variations, maybe in like the locator caption style or maybe third person narration style. All the X-Men books look the same and none of it was really decided by us. They all just have like a house style with a mixed case font and all the balloons are white. So Sins of Sinister was just a really long, really straightforward, but really fun to read book.
Yeah.
That was tons of fun. I love Mr. Sinister. He's one of my top 5 Marvel characters. Probably one of my top 5 comic characters, period.
He's great.
Especially written by Kieran.
Yeah.
One Bad Day. I didn't go too bold with that one because it's Jamie McKelvey. So his work is very clean. I too want to be clean, and I already know what works with him because I lettered like all those issues of Young Avengers and Wicked and Divine and Phonogram. I know what to look out for with him, and it's best to just keep it simple. And Jamie is really good at like positive and negative space. And I won't lie, it kind of trips me out lettering him because he's so good at it, and I'm just so much more self-conscious when I'm lettering his work because there's so much like negative space. It feels like I have to be really precise about where I put the balloon because there's just so much where it could go. But with like a more hyper detailed artist, it's just easier.
Because there's fewer choices?
Exactly. I don't think I could have put it better. Thank you, David. And also, Jamie's my friend. I want to do a good job for him. But, and fortunately, that book was mostly captioned, so it did end up lettering pretty quickly. And they picked out a font that I didn't think that they would go for, but I tried it anyway because I don't use it very much. I did that book in over a 3-month period in 3 different batches of 24 pages, I think. And Human Target is really different because Greg Smallwood pretty much dictates everything. He'll send me like a batch of balloon placements because he pretty much letters the book himself while he's drawing it. I think to make sure that like all the balloons are in a good spot and stuff, and to like make sure he's getting the flow right. So yeah, that book really doesn't need me. I'm still glad that I get to do it. So yeah, I'll read his placements and pretty much follow his balloon placements to a T unless I think they would look better someplace else. And early on in the book, I think with issues 1 and 2, he said, listen, just put the balloons like here, here, and here. Like if you're covering up my artwork, it's fine. Just go for it. And I said, sorry, dude, I'm a fan of yours, and there is no way in hell I'm covering up more of your artwork than I have to. I want to see it, and so do the fans.
Yeah.
And after that, he backed off.
That is interesting because those 3 projects, in a lot of ways, I mean, like they're big too. So that you think that there's going to be a lot of like overlap, but what you just said really does underline all of like the kind of different individual and line-wide kind of, I don't know, quirks there are. Because it's like the X-Men line's interesting. You've been working on it since the beginning. You were on House of X and Powers of 10. And that was a line that was very much created with a very specific design sense from the start, thanks to Jonathan Hickman and Tom Moeller. Right. And like that's not something, it's so holistic. It's like you really can't mess with it. It's just, it is what it is. And then with Greg, it's so precise, and he goes in and he knows exactly what he wants. And it's like, like you said, it's like almost like the project doesn't need you. And then with Jamie, it's like Jamie is interesting because like Jamie is like a cornucopia of choices because he gives you so much space. And it's interesting that like they almost kind of exist seemingly on spectrums in terms of choices, where it's like the first two, Sins of Sinister and Human Target, don't really have a lot of choices in terms of what you can make because the choices have either already been made, well, they just have already been made. And with Jamie, it's like you have a lot of options, but almost to the same degree, there are fewer because you've worked together so long and you kind of know what he needs and wants.
Exactly.
It's interesting how much the personalities and the kind of structures you go into kind of define your role in some ways.
And like you said, this is all happening at the big two. 10 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. Everything would look the same.
Yeah.
Like aside from variation and fonts, like all the balloons in every Marvel book were pretty much done the same way. There wasn't much variation unless they brought in John Workman to make something.
All uppercase too, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
I guess Ultimate wasn't, was it?
Ultimate was mixed. Ms. Marvel has been mixed since the beginning. I don't remember when that started.
So you've seen evolution from the inside where like kind of some of those stylistic things have been allowed to kind of take hold in a way that they previously didn't?
Yeah. And it seems to be the indie influence, because once Image really took off, it brought with it a variety of lettering styles, and that bled into the big two and how they do things. And now we have more freedom with how we do things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got to do pretty wild stuff on Batman, all things considered. And it's weird because it's Batman, it's their flagship book. And I'm not using terribly conventional styles there, at least in my opinion.
How much does your approach shift if it's like a for hire book versus like a creator one? Like does say like Old Dog, well, I mean, you just said Batman has a fair amount of freedom, but does Old Dog come with more freedom than Batman, or does it not really matter whether or not it's for hire or creator owned? It's all kind of the same to some degree.
I give the creator owned books a little more TLC.
Mm-hmm.
I know the books are closer to the creators' hearts, and I just want to like in general do a better job on them. And they're also more creatively diverse, and I want to like that's where I get to try new things. Like my style on Old Dog, it's basically a style I've used. It's a style that I've used elsewhere, but like with different strokes and different fonts to better match what both Declan's style and just what Declan asked for. And also on Love Everlasting, I'm trying to emulate comics that were made 70 years ago in that book, and lettering was really different back then.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not just like perfectly symmetrical balloons, it's balloons that are built in like stacks, and it's not like different balloons stacked together. It's a single balloon, but it has ovular stacks in it. Ovular is totally a word. It doesn't sound sexual at all.
No. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea, and the Renegade comic book publisher is back doing their crazy antics. The latest includes putting a comic from Mark Waid and David Lapham, The First Supper, into a recent edition of Previews for Order completely randomly. Or it was the latest, until Bad Idea also snuck a new comic from Joshua Dysart and Kano, The First 7 Days, into the same edition of Previews. Don't worry if you missed it, because you probably should have, as it was hidden under the publisher named B-Side Press with fake creator names. That's how Bad Idea rolls, though, making notable comics with great creators in extraordinarily unusual ways. Keep your eye out for whatever is next with Bad Idea, if you can. And now, back to the show. I did think it was interesting. I came across an interview with you where you said that Bitch Planet, Die, and Redlands were your favorite jobs when you were working on them. And it's interesting because those are all creator owned. Those are all ones that, maybe you gave a little bit more TLC to. What was it, what stood out about those? Was it just the people side of things, or was it project specific?
Both. They're all pretty subversive. They're all sending something up in a different way. Like Bitch Planet is a sci-fi women's prison satire that's telling the world how bullshit gender equality is in Western civilization. Redlands is about witches, and it begins with a deeply cathartic act of a racist police department getting its comeuppance, and then it being followed by the uncertainty of living in a rural town run by witches. And Dai is sending up the entire fantasy genre. And I guess I'm just a sucker for that. I'm a big fan of killing idols. And you know, I'm friends with all the people who made those books. I'm friends with Kelly Sue and Val and Jordy and Kieran and Stephanie and I guess Vanessa. We don't talk very much, but I'm sure if we saw each other, we would have a good time. And like that's a big part of it too. When you work on a book with somebody, especially for a long time, like the WickDiv guys still feel like family to me, even if I don't see most of them as much anymore. And like that's a big part of just what makes the job enjoyable. And it happens on big two books sometimes. If you're working on a book where you already know everyone and you've known each other forever, it's a nice feeling. On that note, I have no idea what my favorite book is to work on right now.
No, that's fine. It's interesting because it seems like there's multiple levels that you enjoy a project on. Because like, for one, you know, like you very specifically mentioned, like Sins of Sinister was fun. It was a fun book. You know, it was kind of I don't want to say rote experience, but it was like an experience that you knew what it was going to be like from a letter standpoint, but you enjoyed it because you enjoyed reading it. So that's one. There's the people side where you enjoy working with the people. But then it seems like maybe there's certain projects where maybe you get a little bit more freedom or you get to do things a little bit differently. And like that can be fun too. It seems like you kind of enjoy varying projects on different levels or on multiple levels at the same time.
Yeah, it does keep things from getting boring. All the books that I work on, no two are really run the same way, except I guess Sins of Sinister and Immortal X-Men. They pretty much are the same book, but yeah, it keeps things from getting boring.
Yeah. Another book you've worked on is Adventure Man.
Woo! Also friends.
There's a lot of fonts involved with that, like a lot of different typefaces and everything. It's interesting because it seems to me that would be like the number required to use and keep track of would be a lot. But that might be less of a challenge than I realized. That might just be my non-letterer brain playing a part in here. I'm curious as to where like the challenges lie in lettering. Like, is it mostly about juggling all the work, or are there projects you find particularly challenging in specific ways?
It's both. Well, keeping track of fonts is usually pretty easy because I and most other letterers build specific Illustrator template files for each of our books. So, and we keep all of our we keep all of our balloons and tails and stuff on that page, but also if there are any custom voice styles, we keep them on that page. It's just another way to like both keep things organized and just keep everything efficient. So you can just like click and drag something from off the artboard onto the artboard if you need it. And keeping track of all the fonts on Adventure Man is pretty easy. I want to credit Matt Fraction for that, I think. I think the different fonts were his idea. There's that. If the rest of your team isn't terribly organized, that can be a problem. If your book is prone to rewrites, or I don't want to say late artists because that's just an inevitability if you work on a book long enough. But like, yeah, it can be a challenge if a book is running late and it still has to hit its deadline. And I'm the one at the end of the assembly line, and it eats into my time a lot. I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah. Stress.
Yeah, stress. And I don't know, once in a while, you'll find yourself on a team where like maybe the creators don't gel that well together. Like maybe they like each other and get along great, but like say if you're working with a very verbose writer and an artist who is, unlike McKelvey, not good at negative space, that can be because like if you have 20 word balloons and you just don't know where to put them, it can be a real mess. Like other letterers talk about the importance of speaking order, where like make sure you put whichever character is speaking first, put them on the left, and whoever's speaking last, put them on the right. It's a pretty good rule to follow. There are ways around it. Yeah, there's just a whole great big mess of challenges. Like just like with efficiencies, the things that force you into them can be small things that add up to a big thing.
Yeah. Has becoming a letterer changed your experience of reading comics? I've talked about this in the past in the podcast where it's like having a specific role makes you hypercritical of that role because it's just like you can't turn that part of your brain off. Do you have a tough time reading comics because you can't turn off that part that like sees lettering as a letterer?
My bar for if I know a book is good is if I don't notice the lettering because I'm too engaged in the story.
Yeah.
But it used to be a much bigger problem for me when I was first starting out, but I've learned to turn it off now and just enjoy books for what they are. And for the most part, the books I'm reading have fantastic lettering that I'm learning stuff from. I just started Nightwing by Tom Taylor, and I am loving Wes Abbott's lettering in that book. It's really good.
Yeah.
I like his choice of font. I like his sound effects, and I love that we don't know each other, but I'm still going to talk like we're friends or whatever. He's been in the game for so long, and he's still pushing himself to try new things. It's fantastic. You love to see it.
Yeah, very good lettering. I mean, and also Eisner Award nominee rival for you last year, I believe. So
yeah, if he won, I'd be happy.
Yeah. You know, this is an aside. I always find that Eisner is very interesting from a lettering standpoint because it's always like, you know, you were nominated last year. Actually, it was you and 3 other like full-time letterers, like including Wes. And then it was Barry Windsor-Smith for Monsters. And it's always interesting where it's like the full-time letterers against cartoonists who are typically doing one project. And like, that's not to say that they didn't do a great job, but in some ways it's almost like 2 different types of jobs. Does that ever seem a little strange to you as like somebody who does it full time, where it's like, you know, you're trying to compete against like somebody who strictly works on one project and it's like a labor of love, where like Barry Windsor-Smith literally worked on it for like 30 years. Like, how do you compete against that? Right.
Well, first I'll give the answer that I know the Eisners are going to give, and they'll say that the category is best lettering.
Yes.
And to be fair, Barry Windsor-Smith did do pretty fantastic lettering in that book.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit, from like a letterer standpoint, it is pretty demoralizing to like not just losing sucks, but I'm fine with it. But to lose to someone who's like, I can't speak for Barry Windsor-Smith. I've never met him. I enjoy his work, but I sincerely doubt that he cares about winning best lettering.
Right.
And I reckon that's the case for most of the people who have won best lettering who aren't Todd Klein. Like, I'm sure Stan Sakai was honored at some point to win best lettering for Usagi Yojimbo and Gru, and then he just keeps winning it. I don't know him either, but like the first, not to toot my own horn, but the first 3 times I was nominated for an Eisner, I always lost to him.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, he does good work, but I seriously doubt he cares. And it would mean so much more to the letterers if they won an Eisner. And I'm about to be controversial. I don't really care about winning one. I am honored to be nominated, and that like people who I work with would put my name forward for something like that. That means a lot to me, and it feels great. But if I wasn't nominated for an Eisner this year or any other year ever again, I would be totally fine with that.
Yeah.
So like, I think just for the general health of the business of lettering, I wish they would like broaden their horizons a little bit more, and just stick to people who really are putting their all into this and like really dedicating their entire professional life to it.
Yeah.
That would be a good thing.
It is interesting to see like sometimes the nominations, because it was like the first time I looked at the nominations from 2021, whatever, last year's, when I looked at the nominations, and it was funny because it was like there was Barry Windsor-Smith with Monsters, and then like for you and a couple of your other peers who were full-time letters, it actually broke the page because there were so many projects listed in there.
Yeah.
And it was complete, like it was, I don't know what happened with the formatting for the page, but I also think that kind of speaks to the volume. It is just really interesting. Like I was looking through the winners, and it was, I think, basically 100% cartoonists or Todd Klein. And that's not to diminish any of their work. It's just, it's always been something that kind of strikes me as an odd thing in the Eisners, but I don't want to go too far down that path. I'm sorry. I led us down a dark path.
It's okay. I'm surprised it hasn't come up before, like in other interviews that I've done. And like, I don't know, it's cool to clear the air about it.
Yeah. I also think that's a healthy mentality you have about like not really caring, because I used to care. Like I used to submit my stuff yearly, and I would to be honest, it would cause me anxiety. I was stressed out about the prospect of possibly being Like the idea of yes or no on being nominated, but even the idea of having to be one of like the final 5 or whatever, that also like just like there was layers of anxiety on top of one another. And then I stopped applying and I felt better, which is like there's freedom in not being involved with it.
That's how I felt too. Like there was 1 year within those 4 that I wasn't nominated. I'm like, oh great, I get a year off.
Yeah, good. It was good. One thing that we've talked about a number of times without really kind of going into it is that you do collaborate with certain creators over and over. Like Tom King's on repeat. You often work with Kieran Gillen and or Jamie McKelvey, sometimes with separation. We talked about this a bit before, but how much of a difference does it make when you know your collaborators from previous experiences? Like, is it your preference to have as many repeat partners as possible?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, the short answer is yes. Like I did, like once I started working with them, I did think, yeah, I want to keep working with them. They're great. But I also, do want to like work with new people every once in a while, try out new things. And like, that's another thing that keeps the job from being boring. It's collaborating with people with unique voices, like Eve Ewing. I've lettered most, maybe all of her Marvel books at this point, and I just really like working with her. She's super smart and a total pro. And I've been working with Chip Zdarsky a lot these last few years, and it's kind of the same deal. And just the sheer shock, damn it, that's going to come out wrong. Like the, just the surprise that he is like this, that he is like an amazing superhero writer when he's known mostly for being a humorist. And like he can just do it, and there's nothing ironic about it. Like Daredevil is an unironically fantastic Daredevil book, and there's no like weird caveat to it. Damn it, he's gonna hear this, and
I'm sorry in advance for you. Chip,
boy.
maybe, I don't know. Well, you're also a Daredevil fan too, right?
I am, yeah.
There's like an advantage there too, but yeah, it is interesting because from a process standpoint, I imagine repeat partners is very advantageous. But from a pushing yourself standpoint, I imagine that having new collaborators is a really good way to have to learn new things that you like to do or push yourself in new directions that you wouldn't expect. I mean, is that the case?
Yes, definitely. Oh, yeah. I did a book a few years ago with Jendi Tartakovsky.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and that book was buck wild.
I don't think he's got another gear.
Yeah, that's... I mean, yeah, he wrote and drew the book, and he wanted the lettering done in a really specific, super zany way that I was not used to doing. But boy, did it like push me, and all for the better. I felt like there's like, for me personally, there is a before that book and after that book. The name of the book is Cage. I don't know why I'm calling it that.
Is that the one that never came out?
It did come out.
Oh, it did come out.
The Luke Cage book?
Yeah.
I got comps for it.
There you go.
Full circle. I do like working with my collaborators that I do, both because like I sought them out. It's worked out great. It provides job security, and I just like them as people. I like having them in my life. And yeah, once in a while, it's great to meet somebody new and try new stuff. And hey, maybe we can develop a long-term working relationship too.
Right. Like you said, you started working with Eve and you started working with Chip, and then now you're still working with the both of them. But I do think your point about like a before and after a moment, like where you worked with Jendi on that project, on that Cage project, you can actually point to that and say like, after that, I was different. Like my work was different.
Yeah.
Is that something, we talked earlier about how like doing so much, there can be a sea where it just, you don't remember certain projects necessarily, but are there ones that throughout your career where you can say like this one really pushed me into a new direction and it was very beneficial for me?
Yeah. Cage is one. Redlands was one. Pretty Deadly was definitely one. It's not quite the same, but Mr. Miracle feels like that kind of a book to me too.
What was it about those?
Well, on all of those books, I was made to try new things by my collaborators. Like Jendi pushed me, Kelly Sue pushed me, Jordy pushed me, all in friendly, helpful ways. They weren't shoving me or anything.
Yeah.
And Mr. Miracle, it was both Mitch I'm about to fudge his last name, Mitch Garrett's working a new way. Because like his work on that book was like nothing I'd ever seen before, especially from him. And we were both like kind of forced to try. I was at least forced to like change my lettering style to adapt to how he was working.
Mm-hmm.
And it all worked out great. Like I've been working that way with him ever since on Strange Adventures and One Bad Day Riddler, and I'm sure whatever else he has coming up soon. I know there's something in the pipeline, but that one was more about like workflow than actual like artistic creativity. And it ended up working out really great.
Was Strange Adventures odd because it had both Mitch and Doc on it? Like, did you? They had a. I mean, that was one of the interesting things about that book. Because I'm not going to say that they were the same, but they did kind of move closer towards each other in that book in some ways. I think, especially in how they colored themselves. Did that having two different like kind of lines to aim at? Did that change how you approach the art or the lettering?
Yeah, I used a much more simple symmetrical style for the Doc pages because he was like, it started off at least with him going for a more old school retro look, and I thought, yeah, this part calls for something more traditional, and Mitch's art is more askew, and the style that I used on Mr. Miracle was already like rougher, asymmetrical, and I already knew it worked, so I just lifted it and then used the same font for both artists, but changed the balloons used on both of them. The only hard part was like making sure I used the right style on the right artist. Like there was one time I lettered a full Doc page and went, oh crap, I used the Mitch balloons by mistake, and I had to go and redo it.
Have you ever had any misses that you didn't catch?
I mean, yes, definitely.
No comment. No comment.
Yeah, it sucks, but it happens.
I bet, I talk to artists a lot, and they'll say things like they hate looking back on their work. Like if you look back on that Punisher annual that you may or may not remember, would that be a tough look? Would it be tough for you to look at your work then?
Yes, to a point. I have done that a few times, but this is like a whole therapy thing. But I've had to teach myself to be more forgiving to my past self about where they were at the time. And when I look at my old stuff, it's through a more compassionate, empathetic lens. I go, oh, these balloons are too tight, but hey, that's where I was at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's stuff like that. Or I look at it and go, sometimes I'll look at it and go, oh, I didn't know I was doing that thing that I do right now all the way back then. Like, hey, good for me. Like whether it's a balloon placement or like some particular stylistic quirk, like I'll pop open a book from like maybe an early issue of Wicked and Divine, look at a sound effect or something and go, oh, cool. I didn't know I was doing that all the way back then. All right. You were rocking it, Clayton. Good work.
Yeah. There's also the flip side of that with the artists I've talked to where sometimes they'll look back and they'll realize that there's like something appealing that they used to do that they don't do now. Like often for them, it's like an energy or like a rawness to it that they wish they could kind of tap back into. So every once in a while, I mean, maybe you look back, like you said, you find something that you were already doing that you were impressed by, or maybe there's something you want to take from that. But I don't know. It's tricky. The last thing I want to do is read any of my old stuff. I would be very upset about it. All I want to do is edit it and make it less bad.
You could do like Taylor Swift and like rewrite them. Like,
oh my
David's
God.
edition.
I don't need more work, Clayton. I don't need it. Last question I have for you. I actually came across this line from an interview you did where you said, and I quote, all of my collaborators are growing and I have to grow with them, which keeps things interesting. And I thought that was a super interesting line. It's something you kind of already touched on to some degree, because I feel like I know what you mean. That, when like for example, like Jamie tried new things with the Catwoman book where he was coloring himself and he was trying new approaches and everything like that. So when your collaborators keep trying new things, it pushes you to do the same. But I was wondering, like, can you elaborate on that idea? Like, how does the growth of longtime collaborators or frequent partners force you to do the same?
Well, it just comes up when it does. It's not really something you can anticipate.
Right.
I think a lot of it is just born of insecurity, not wanting to be the weakest link on the team. And if you're working on a book where the rest of the team is like batting 1,000, you want to keep up with them. It was the same thing with Mitch on Mr. Miracle. Like, yeah, I'd lettered him before, but I'd never done like a style exclusive to Mitch before. And here he is for the first time coloring his own stuff. He's using this new gritty photorealistic style that's still really stylized. And I'm like, okay, I have to do right by this guy, both because he's really good and because he's really nice. So a lot of it is just that wanting to do like right by them and make them happy. And once again, it's like enhance, don't distract. And if your enhancement powers aren't matching up with like that level of artwork, then you're a distraction. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm. like this is going to sound like I'm making a value statement on some of your projects or something like that. But when it, like Mr. Miracle, I think Mr. Miracle would generally be considered a very esteemed and notable work from the past decade of comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine you kind of knew that as you were doing it, like maybe it felt different or something like that. Do you feel like you put added pressure on yourself when it's like a project like that where you know that like this is going to be, I don't want to say a showpiece, but like, you know, a book that people talk about going forward and like revisit going forward?
I'll confess, I did feel that way in the beginning, and this happens with a lot of projects. After the first 3 or 4 issues of Mr. Miracle, I pretty much knew what I was doing and I'd found my rhythm and I wasn't thinking about that as much. I'm like, yeah, what we're doing is working. I'm going to stick to it.
Yeah.
So, and fortunately for my sanity, yeah, I wasn't just on my toes for all 12 issues. I would have gone I would have gone completely insane.
I mean, I do think that there's something to be said where it's like, once you get like, and it's a 12 issue series, if you're like 3 issues in, if all of a sudden you're like, you know what? This shit's getting wingdings. People will be like, what in the fuck is happening here? I like how I got all of my curse words out in the final sentence, but it's like you can't do giant stylistic shifts halfway through a series. And if you did, it would be glaring, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, unless the book is calling for that somehow.
Right.
Like, unless there's some huge cataclysmic event within the narrative of the book. Yeah. And also that can kind of backfire on you. By the time we got done with The Wicked and the Divine, we'd done like more than 45 issues. And I was like, artistically, I was so bored because I've been using that same style for 5 years and I felt like I'd outgrown it. But to keep the book consistent looking, I had to stick with it and keep doing it that way. So that's a fun little irony, I guess.
Because there was the magazine article. I think it was like 11. Was that all the lettering for the articles? I imagine that was you.
I don't think so. I think Jamie did them.
Oh.
And there was that one issue that was the full zine.
Oh, right.
That was the one issue I didn't work on.
Oh.
One nice thing about working with Jamie is that he does like all the signage and phone text himself, and it saves me a lot of time. And it looks better in colors.
I imagine like that type of stuff and like sound effects. Like sound effects, I imagine like, I don't know what the split is, but I imagine like sometimes artists are doing that stuff themselves because they want it to match their line.
Yeah, and I have no problem with that. It looks great.
It does. But Clayton, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about your lettering career, working with varying partners and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, man. I had a blast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with letterer Clayton Cowles. You can find his work basically everywhere and in every comic. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman, who stepped in and edited this podcast. If you thought this episode sounded a little bit better than usual, that's because Deanna. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Kevin Bides, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Matteo Ciccati, Chris Doré, Nir Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submed Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elzo Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Broward, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, Akil, Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed off-panels, outro, and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.